You know, when thinking about James Isaac, he had once said about David Cronenberg and his relationship to him, you know, he knew that I wanted to direct and that it was my goal. He let me into his world and I could ask him any questions I wanted on what he was doing. I'd ask, why did you block it like that? Or what were you thinking here? He really allowed me to pick his brain. I don't know what's more unfortunate, the fact that James Isaac died at a young age of 51 or that he only had the chance to direct 4 feature films. But man, when you look at it, what a career he had.
BodyBags, where horror lies.
Hey guys, Rob from Georgia here with you. I'm your Wednesday night host here at BodyBags. It is week 351, 1 week before theme week, which just happens to be war horror. So be on the lookout for that. But this week I thought I would go back into the archives and pull out a film from one James Isaac, who had a very, very young career, but a pretty full career at that. He died, unfortunately, I think in 2012 at only 51. And to that point, he had only had 4 films to his credit, this being one of them, The Horror Show, which is a movie that I have fond memories with. It's one that competed, of course, with Shocker in the same year in '89. Shocker came out in October. The Horror Show came out in April. Shocker had a substantially larger budget than The Horror Show, but this was James Isaac's directorial debut, and with Sean as Cunningham at the helm as producer. Man, I mean, James Isaac, you could not ask for a better situation to step into, one where your cinematographer has shot films like Hell Night, Reanimator, of course House, From Beyond, and Prison, Deep Star 6, big connection to Deep Star 6. Of course, Henry Manfredini, Friday the 13th fame, of course, will do the music. Howard Berger, Kurtzman, and Nicketeer, of course. K&B Effects will do some really great effects for the money they were working with. And of course, I said him already, Sean S. Cunningham was at the helm as producer, who was very, very aware that Wes was working on a movie, and both films are very similar because both basically deal with a serial killer of sorts who ultimately is apprehended by our heroes and ultimately go to the electric chair, but both have prepared for themselves for that eventuality in that they might return from the grave and wreak vengeance on those who caused their demise. So James Isaac, man, what a career. I mentioned earlier. He got his start off, you would have found him working on some of the creatures and whatnot in Return of the Jedi. Gremlins, he was on the team there. He quickly moved into the visual effects field. He worked with Cronenberg, The Fly in '86, Naked Lunch. Ultimately, I think he served as maybe assistant director or maybe just in charge of visual effects on Existence. But he also handled the visual effects on Deep Star 6. Just a really weird connection with that film and this film. And then, of course, well, I mentioned it, 4 films only to his credit. But what a career. Starting off really at ground level and then ultimately getting to the point where he's just hitting his 50s, maybe just hitting his stride. He also, he had 4 films, I said, to his credit. This one, Friday the 13th, Part 10, if you did not know that. Skinwalkers and Pig Hunt was the last film he directed, unfortunately, just a few years before he died. He had the blessing, though, with his directorial debut with this film, in working with Lance Henriksen, man. He is our main protagonist. He's our detective, Lucas McCarthy. And the movie, unlike Shocker, it's weird, I was thinking about that earlier. These things do happen like this. They happen in pairs. And I don't know if I showed this off, but this is the Arrow release of House 3, or as we know it, The Horror Show. That's the way it would have been marketed in our video stores when we were younger. Of late, it's been, kind of shoved into this franchise and marketed overseas and whatnot. But it's its own film that stands apart from the House, other House films. But I was thinking about this earlier. You know, these things come out in pairs. In '89, of course, the horror show would come out first, and then Shocker a little bit later on. But we also see things like Deep Impact came out before Armageddon, had the smaller budget, but Armageddon had the much larger budget. It's big blockbuster. But you know, I happen to think Deep Impact is the superior film. You could say the same thing about Dante's Peak and Volcano. Similar idea they're going. So these things come out in pairs, if you did not notice sometimes. And I'm not ready to quite say that the horror show is better than Shocker. The Shocker is definitely the more entertaining of the two. It is the more over the top of the two. It is fun, man. It is a fun film. Mitch Pileggi, of course, taking on the title role of our mass murderer. But Brion James, man, what a freaking job he does in this movie, man. This is his freaking role, man. Much in a way, kind of like Mitch Pileggi. He really does steal the show in this. Lance is freaking great. But unlike Shocker, this one really does revolve around the family. It's, dimensionally speaking, it's a little bit different. Well, it's a lot different than Shocker, because a lot of what happens when our killer is ultimately apprehended in the electric chair scene, man, excuse me, is maybe unparalleled in film history, man. The work that K&B did on that, just that sequence. Kane Hodder was the stunt coordinator. He was involved in that sequence. And man, when you see that sequence laid out in the documentary and the work that went into that, man, it's freaking awesome, man. But when he does die and he does make his return, it's more focused in on Lance. He's on the McCarthy household and what happens in that house. So it sort of is a house haunting, but then again, it's this idea that he's come back to wreak vengeance, to ruin Detective McCarthy's life. And I would say with the writing here involved in this movie, it's interesting because you get this is sort of where this movie strives to be. You know, there's this idea here going that the daughter has a boyfriend, he's hiding out in the basement, he's waiting for mom and dad to head on out so that him and Lance Hendricks' daughter in this movie, Lucas's daughter, can have a little rendezvous downstairs in the basement. He ultimately will fall victim. So I'm not going to try to give too many spoilers away, but he'll fall victim, and so when he disappears, the daughter doesn't know where he's at. Later on in the film, when Lance starts, or Lucas starts falling apart, there's a scene when he goes down into the basement because he thinks he hears someone in the house. He ultimately ends up in the basement. Of course, the daughter is up looking for her boyfriend, who's supposed to be hiding in the basement. And ultimately what the daughter and her brother end up hearing is their dad screaming up a storm, but they think that he's found the boyfriend. In fact, he thinks he's talking to Max Jenke, who is our mass murderer returned from the grave. But that sequence of events will come back a little bit later when the boyfriend's body is found and blame is pinned on Detective Lucas. And so just to say that the writing here is somewhat effective. I mean, you know, it's interesting. I'm not ready to say that this is better than Shocker, but as its own unique, restrained or contained film, it works on a lower key than Shocker. And quite frankly, there's aspects of that I quite enjoy more than I do with Shocker. But having revisited Shocker last night as well, what a fun over the top film that is. But anyways, this film was unlike a lot of films. It was really fun to revisit, and I didn't sit there thinking to myself the whole time, holy freaking crap, what did I like about this? I found myself thinking quite the opposite, like, dang, this movie still works. It works for me, and it's one of those that I'll probably continue to revisit from time to time, as well as Shocker. And of course, there's that other film, Prison, that's kind of a similar thing going on with a guy who's put into a chair and who comes back. But if you've never seen the horror show, or it's been a very long time, if I could just, give you a few reasons why you need to recheck this out. The Arrow copy has the uncut European cut of this film. I had not revisited the American cut edition, which is on here as well. I just looked at the uncut edition. But the work that K&B puts into this, the work that Kane Hodder puts into this as a stunt coordinator, of course, this film, of course, is shot pretty well. And, of course, Henry Manfredini. There's a lot of reasons why one ought to give this a shot. And to think that James Isaac, now, maybe the biggest film he would have would be Jason 10. One really does wonder where his career would have ended up had he had opportunity. But unfortunately, he will not. He will be taken from us at a way too early of an age. In fact, me just turning 50, him having left us at 51, it does make you think about your mortality a little bit. So in week 351, I bring you, I hope, a good reason to revisit this, or maybe check it out for the very first time. And if there's any way you can check out the uncut, and check out the docs, man. There's an interview with Kane Hodder that's pretty cool on this, as well as a great one with K&B. There is a commentary with Sean S. Cunningham as well. I've not listened to that. I'm not sure how his commentaries tend to roll, but that's there as well. And so as we make ready to roll into a theme week, a war horror week, be on the lookout for that, as well as the rest of the videos as they drop throughout the week. And man, stay plugged into BodyBags, man. That's where it's at. It's where it continues to be. And as always, we end these things off with Go Bills.
This is not a dream. Not a dream.